Now that we know how to use HTML to make a web page, I'd like to discuss how we can make our web pages look more interesting, how we can add style to our web pages. An important idea behind good web design is that we want to keep the content and the code that makes it look nice separate from each other. This is called separation of content and presentation. HTML is convenient for making web pages containing information, but this does not include styling. For styling, we will use CSS. So we have HTML for content plus CSS for style equals effective web pages. So what is CSS? CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheet. A style sheet is a set of instructions that tell us how text should look. For example, a style sheet might specify things like color, font, size, text decoration, spacing around items, placement, etc. The cascade is the set of rules that decide how the style is added to our pages. So how does it work? CSS uses selectors. The selectors pick elements from the HTML. We set the style for the element using a property value pair. The property tells us what to set, and the value tells us how to set it. So let's look at an example. In this example here, we have H1, that's the selector, color is the property, and red is the value. So this example the selector will choose H1, the H1 tag in our HTML, and then it will set the color of that element to red. So all the H1s in our HTML will become red. So how can we add CSS to our HTML? There are three methods for adding CSS to HTML. The first method is to add the CSS on the HTML tag as an attribute. The second method is to add the CSS in the HTML head as a style sheet. The third method is to add the CSS as a separate file. In this case, we need to connect the style sheet file to the HTML by adding a link in the head of the HTML document. So let's look at method number 1, adding the CSS on the HTML tag. We can add CSS directly to any tag using the style attribute. So here's an example where we add the style color red directly to the H1 tag. Since this is specified on the tag that we want, we don't need to use a selector. This method should really only be used in special cases. Let's look at the second method, adding the CSS in the head of the document. With this method, we use the style tag inside the head of the HTML. So we can see here we have the head, and inside we have the style tags, and inside the style tags we place our CSS. This style will now apply to all matching tags in the document. Method number 3 as a separate style sheet. With this method, we will need to specify the style sheet that we want to use using the link tag. We put the link tag inside the head of the HTML document. The link tag will need two attributes, rel and href. The value of the rel attribute will be style sheet. The value of the href attribute will be a pointer to our style sheet file. In this example, I'm assuming that our style sheet is called My Style CSS. We will also need to make sure that the file My Style CSS exists with the correct name and in the correct location. In the method number 3, in this method, the style sheet will be a separate file and it will contain only CSS. Let's compare the three methods. Each method has its advantages and disadvantages. Specifying the CSS directly on the HTML tag is quick and easy, but it breaks the separation of HTML and CSS. Adding the CSS using style tags inside the head of the HTML document does offer some separation of HTML and CSS. It does also keep the HTML and CSS together in the same file. But a disadvantage is that this styling will only apply to the one document where we've included it. The third method, adding the CSS as a separate file, has a number of advantages. It allows us to reuse the style sheet for multiple documents, and this allows us to give us a unified look to a more complicated website. The disadvantage, however, is that it's more complex to set up. Among these methods, method number 1 should generally be avoided. Method number 3 is the one that we prefer, especially for complex websites. Next, we're going to look at some CSS properties in a little bit of more detail. The first property that we want to look at is color. Color can be applied to many different parts of our web page: text, background, borders. Color in CSS can be written in several different methods. The standard method is the RGB method, where we decompose the color into its composite parts. RGB stands for red, green, and blue. So if we want to specify red, we give it maximum value for red and minimal values for green and blue. Parts are generally given by using a 1-byte number. So maximum red would be 255, and minimum number would be 0. So we can specify red by giving the value of RGB 25500. Another way of specifying colors is by using color names. There's dozens of different names: red, deep sky blue, forest green, misty rose, and others. Here are some examples of how we can add color to our page. So the first two add red color to headings. The third one would make the background of our pages deep sky blue. Next, we're going to look at properties for text. The look of text is determined by the font. There are hundreds of different fonts, and here's a collection of some examples. Fonts are grouped into families with different functions. One of the most important distinctions between different kinds of fonts used for text written with the Roman alphabet is the difference between fonts that have serifs and those that don't. Serifs serifs are the small decorations to the endpoints of letters. Fonts that have serifs are called serif. Fonts that don't have serifs are called sans serif. Serif fonts are preferred in printed materials. They are more comfortable to read for reading long texts. Sans serif fonts are preferred in signs and other similar things. They can be read very quickly. They're also often used for web pages. Aside from serif and sans serif fonts, we also have monospace fonts. Monospace fonts are fonts where all the letters have the same width. This is commonly used for computer code. Cursive fonts are fonts that are made to look like handwriting. Fantasy fonts are used for special effects on posters and other materials. CSS has a variety of properties for styling text. For example, text align will help us to make the text align to one side or the other, or place it in the middle of a document or web page. Text height is used to determine the space between lines of text. Text decoration gives us a number of effects, such as underlining or crossing out, line through. Another thing we can do is add shadows to text to make it stand out. Many HTML elements, paragraphs, headings, lists, list items, are so-called block elements. This means that they occupy a rectangular space on the web page. The space around these elements is organized by using the box model. It includes areas such as called border, margin, and padding. The margin is the space around the element. The border is a line that we can place around the element if we want. The padding is the space between the border and the content. Margin and padding are set using a number. So here's some examples. Border is the combination of 3 different properties: border width, border style, and border color. Another common element in HTML are links. Links can be styled using what are known as pseudo-class selectors. Pseudo-classes are keywords that describe the state of the element. Links can be different depending on whether we want to click them or not. To specify a pseudo-class element, we use a colon, which says to separate it from the selector. And here are some examples. So the link pseudo-class is used the link pseudo-class is used to select links in our document. The hover pseudo-class is used to select links that we are about to click. So when the cursor is placed over the link. The link pseudo-class is used to select links that we have already seen.